I'm Sarah Mitchell, 28, and I'm a successful pediatric surgeon with everything I've worked for, until the phone call that shattered my carefully built world. Your father needs a kidney transplant, and you're his only match, the voice said. The same father who walked out on Christmas morning when I was 8, leaving behind only empty promises and a broken mother. I stared at the medical records in my hands, my own signature requirements highlighted in yellow, while memories of waiting by the window for 20 years came flooding back. What happened next would force me to choose between the man who abandoned me and the person I'd become because of his absence. Like and subscribe if you've ever faced an impossible choice involving family who hurt you. I can still smell the cinnamon rolls Mom was baking that Christmas morning 20 years ago. The scent filled our small apartment, mixing with the pine from our discount tree that leaned slightly to the left. I was 8 years old, bouncing on my toes in my Rudolph pajamas, waiting for Dad to wake up so we could open presents together. "Dad's sleeping in today, sweetheart," Mom had said, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I didn't recognize as worry back then. "Why don't you help me with breakfast?" But something felt wrong. The apartment was too quiet. Dad's work boots weren't by the door where he always kicked them off. His coffee mug, the one with "World's Greatest Dad" that I'd given him for Father's Day, sat clean and unused in the cabinet. I crept down the hallway to my parents' bedroom, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor. The door was cracked open, and I could see Mom sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her robe, holding something in her hands. She was crying, not the dramatic sobs from movies, but the quiet, devastating kind that makes your chest ache even when you're too young to understand why. "Mom?" I whispered, pushing the door open wider. She looked up quickly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Oh, honey, you startled me." That's when I saw what she was holding, a handwritten note on Dad's work stationery. The paper was wrinkled, like it had been crumpled and smoothed out several times. Mom's hands were shaking as she folded it carefully and tucked it into her robe pocket. "Where's Dad?" I asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Mom's face crumpled for just a moment before she composed herself. "He had to go away for a while, baby. But he loves you very much, and he'll be back soon." Even at 8, I knew what "soon" meant in adult speak. It meant maybe. It meant probably not. It meant the kind of promise adults make when they don't know what else to say. I ran to the closet and threw open the doors. Dad's side was empty, no work shirts, no jeans, no leather jacket that smelled like cigarettes and Old Spice. The hangers swayed like question marks in the sudden draft. "He's really gone," I said, not really a question. Mom nodded, pulling me into her arms. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." We sat there on the bed for what felt like hours, the cinnamon rolls burning in the oven, Christmas morning. Forgotten. Later, Mom would show me the note, not that day, but years later when I was old enough to understand. It was brief, apologetic, and devastatingly vague. "I'm sorry. I have to go. Take care of Sarah. I'll send money when I can. I love you both." He never sent money. He never called. And "soon" turned into forever. That Christmas morning didn't just mark his absence, it marked the beginning of everything else. Mom working double shifts at the diner. Me learning to make my own lunch for school. Both of us pretending we were fine when neighbors asked about Dad, when teachers wanted to schedule parent conferences, when other kids talked about their fathers. The note became Mom's secret shame, tucked away in her jewelry box like a splinter she couldn't remove. And I became the child who stopped believing in promises. The Father's Day card I made in 3rd grade is still in my memory box, 20 years later. Mrs. Peterson had us make them during art time, construction paper hearts glued to folded cardstock, with "I love you Daddy" written in my careful 8-year-old handwriting. While other kids decorated theirs with glitter and stickers, I sat frozen at my desk, crayon hovering over the blank space where I was supposed to draw a picture of my father. "Sarah, do you need help?" Mrs. Peterson asked, crouching beside my chair. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "How do you draw someone who isn't there? How do you make a card for a ghost?" I finished it anyway, a stick figure man with a briefcase and a smile, standing next to a stick figure girl with pigtails. The fantasy father I wished I had. The card went home in my backpack and straight into the shoebox under my bed, along with all the other things I couldn't bear to throw away but couldn't stand to look at. School became my refuge and my battlefield. I threw myself into academics with the single-minded determination of a child who understood that excellence was the only currency that mattered. If I couldn't have a father to be proud of me, I'd give Mom something to brag about instead. While other kids played during recess, I read in the library. While they had sleepovers and birthday parties, I studied. My report cards became Mom's trophies, straight A's taped to the refrigerator like medals of honor. "Sarah's so smart," she'd tell anyone who would listen. "She's going to be somebody important someday." The irony wasn't lost on me, even then. I was becoming somebody important to compensate for being abandoned by someone who was supposed to think I was already important enough to stay. Mom worked constantly, breakfast shift at the diner, then afternoon cleaning houses, sometimes evening catering gigs on weekends. I learned to let myself in after school, to heat up the casseroles neighbors brought over in those first few months, to do my homework at the kitchen table by myself while Mom caught a few hours of sleep before her next shift. "I'm sorry you have to grow up so fast," she'd say sometimes, usually late at night when she thought I was asleep. She'd sit on the edge of my bed, smoothing my hair with hands that smelled like dish soap and disinfectant. This isn't how I wanted it to be. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I understood, that we were fine on our own. But even at 9, 10, 11 years old, I knew we weren't fine. We were surviving, which is different. The absence of a father became a presence all its own. It sat at our dinner table, walked me to school, attended every parent-teacher conference where Mom showed up alone, tired but determined. It was there during career day when I watched other kids' dads talk about being firefighters and accountants and mechanics, and I realized I had no model for what men were supposed to be. That's when I decided to become a doctor. Not because I had some noble calling to heal people, though that came later, but because doctors were important. Doctors were respected. Doctors made enough money that their children never had to watch their mothers cry over unpaid bills at the kitchen table at midnight. I built walls around my heart brick by brick, year by year. If love meant abandonment, if promises meant lies, then I would be the kind of person who didn't need either. I would be successful enough, strong enough, independent enough that no one could ever leave me devastated the way Dad had left Mom. The Father's Day card became my reminder, not of love, but of the danger of believing in it. The medical records arrived by courier at my office on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered in a manila envelope marked, "Confidential, Urgent Medical Consultation." My hands trembled as I broke the seal, 20 years of medical training warring with 20 years of suppressed emotion. The compatibility test results were undeniable. Blood type O negative, matching perfectly. HLA typing showed 6 out of 6 antigen matches, the kind of genetic lottery that happens between close relatives. The kind that made me his best hope for survival, whether I wanted to be or not. I spread the documents across my desk like evidence. In a trial. David Michael Mitchell, age 52. End-stage renal disease, likely caused by decades of untreated diabetes and hypertension. Kidney function at less than 10%. Without dialysis, he had weeks. Without a transplant, months at best. The clinical side of my brain took over, the part that had dissected cadavers in medical school and performed countless surgeries without flinching. His creatinine levels were through the roof, 8.2 mg per deciliter when normal was under 1.2. His estimated glomerular filtration rate showed kidneys that were essentially paperweights in his body. The nephrologist's notes painted a picture of a man who had ignored warning signs for years, who had lived without regard for consequences until those consequences became life-threatening. But it was the genetic testing that hit me like a physical blow. Confirmation of paternity, 99.97% probability. As if 28 years of his absence hadn't been proof enough, science had to rub salt in the wound. This stranger who had abandoned me was biologically, irrefutably, undeniably my father. I pulled up kidney transplant protocols on my computer, reading through procedures I could recite in my sleep. Living donor nephrectomy. Laparoscopic approach. Recovery time of 4 to 6 weeks for the donor, assuming no complications. Risk of surgical mortality, approximately 0.03%. Risk of long-term complications, minimal but present. The numbers should have been comforting. I was a surgeon, I lived in the world of statistics and probabilities. But these weren't just any numbers, they were the metrics of my own potential sacrifice for a man who had never sacrificed anything for me. I called Dr. Reynolds, the transplant coordinator whose name was on the paperwork. Her voice was professionally compassionate, the tone medical professionals use when delivering difficult news to families. "Dr. Mitchell, I understand this is a complicated situation," she said after I'd identified myself. "I want you to know there's no pressure here. Being biologically compatible doesn't create any obligation." "What's his prognosis without the transplant?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. 6 months, maybe 12 with aggressive dialysis. His heart's not strong enough for the waiting list, other candidates would be prioritized. 6 months. To a year. In medical terms, practically a death sentence. In personal terms, a countdown I'd have to live with for the rest of my life, knowing I could have stopped the clock. The psychological evaluation is standard for all potential donors. Dr. Reynolds continued. Living donation to estranged family members requires careful consideration of motivations and expectations. Estranged Such a clinical word for a 20-year wound that had never properly healed. I stared at the compatibility results again. At the genetic markers that connected me to a man I barely remembered. The science was clear, but the ethics were murky. As a doctor, I had sworn to do no harm. But which choice caused more harm, letting him die, or risking my own health to save someone who had never been there for mine? The papers felt heavy in my hands, weighted with more than just information. They were an ultimatum disguised as medical data, a choice I'd never wanted to make delivered to my doorstep like a bill that had finally come due. I couldn't sleep that night, so I did what any millennial does when faced with an impossible situation. I turned to social media. At 2 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, I typed David Mitchell into Facebook's search bar with trembling fingers. There were dozens of David Mitchells, but I found him on the third page. The profile picture made my stomach lurch. It was definitely him, 20 years older but unmistakably the man who used to read me bedtime stories. Gray at the temples now. Lines around his eyes, but the same crooked smile I remembered from childhood photos. His privacy settings were loose, probably because he didn't think anyone from his past would come looking. I scrolled through years of posts with the methodical precision of a detective gathering evidence, each image and status update feeling like a small betrayal. There was his current wife, Linda, a blonde woman with kind eyes who looked nothing like my mother. His daughter Emma, who appeared to be about 16, all braces and cheerleader uniforms. His son Jake, maybe 13, posing with a baseball bat and a gap-toothed grin that looked heartbreakingly familiar. The posts painted a picture of suburban normalcy that made my chest tight with rage. Family barbecues, little league games, birthday parties, father-daughter dances. All the moments he'd given them that he'd stolen from me. I screenshot everything with shaking hands, Christmas mornings with wrapped presents under a real tree, not the discount one Mom and I had struggled to afford. Vacation photos from Disney World, the beach, camping trips. A Father's Day post from 3 years ago where Emma had written, "Thanks for being the best dad ever. Love you infinity times." The best dad ever. To her, maybe. To me, he was a ghost who'd left a note and never looked back. But as I dug deeper, cracks appeared in the perfect family facade. The posts became less frequent over the past 2 years. Linda's updates mentioned financial stress, David being between jobs, the family having to move to a smaller house. There were fundraising posts for medical bills, requests for prayers, mentions of difficult times that were never fully explained. In one particularly revealing post from 6 months ago, Linda had written, "Struggling but staying strong. Sometimes life throws you curveballs you never saw coming. Grateful for family and faith getting us through." So he'd done it again. Not the dramatic midnight abandonment this time, but the slow dissolution of responsibility. The unemployment. The medical bills he couldn't pay. The family watching their security crumble while he made promises he couldn't keep. I found his LinkedIn profile next, a sparse resume showing sporadic employment over the past decade. Construction jobs, sales positions, brief stints that never lasted more than a year or two. No steady career, no progression, no indication of the ambition and drive I remembered him having when I was small. The final piece was his Twitter account, barely used but revealing. Complaints about employers who didn't appreciate loyalty. Rants about economic unfairness. Retweets of get-rich-quick schemes and lottery fantasies. The digital footprint of a man who'd never learned to take responsibility for his own life. I stared at the screenshots I'd collected, spread across my laptop screen like evidence in a case I was building against him. This was what he'd chosen over us, not success or happiness, but another family he was slowly failing in exactly the same ways. The most devastating part wasn't his new life, but how ordinary it all was. I'd spent 20 years imagining he'd left for something extraordinary, something worth the destruction he'd caused. Instead, he'd simply moved his pattern of disappointing people to a new address, with new victims who were just now learning what Mom and I had known for decades. He hadn't left because we weren't enough. He'd left because he wasn't enough, and apparently, he never would be. The voicemail was waiting when I got home from a particularly difficult surgery, a 6-year-old with a ruptured appendix who'd reminded me too much of myself at that age, small and scared and trying to be brave. I almost deleted it without listening. When I saw the unfamiliar number, but something made me press play. "Sarah, this is your father." The voice stopped me cold. 20 years had passed, but I would have recognized it anywhere, slightly raspy from years of smoking, with that particular cadence that had once read me "Good night moon" and promised me everything would be okay. "I know I have no right to call you. I know I lost that right a long time ago. But I'm very sick, sweetheart, and the doctors say you might be able to help me. I'm at Mercy General Hospital, room 314. There was a long pause, filled with The mechanical hum of hospital sounds in the background. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I know you probably hate me. God knows you should. But I need you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you. Haven't regretted. Haven't wished I could take it all back. I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you and your mother, and I've been paying for it ever since. Another pause. I could hear him struggling to breathe, the slight wheeze that indicated his body was failing him. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve your help. But if there's any part of you that remembers when I was your daddy, when I used to push you on the swings and help you build those elaborate pillow forts, if there's any small piece of love left for the man I used to be before I ruined everything. His voice broke completely then, dissolving into a sob that made my chest ache despite everything. Please, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry for everything. I know it's too late, but I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm scared. Baby girl. I'm so scared. The message ended with the mechanical voice asking if I wanted to save, delete, or replay. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, ironic, really, and listened to it 3 more times, each repetition hitting me like a physical blow. Baby girl. He'd called me baby girl when I was small, usually when I was upset about something. When I'd scraped my knee or had a nightmare or couldn't reach something on a high shelf. It was the voice of the father I'd loved before he became the man who left. The problem with abandonment is that it doesn't erase love, it just makes it dangerous. 20 years of carefully constructed walls started to crack as I heard genuine fear and desperation in his voice. This wasn't the confident man who'd walked out on Christmas morning. This was someone facing mortality and finding himself utterly alone. But then I thought about Mom, working 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I thought about the empty savings account, the Christmases with presents from charity drives, the nights I'd heard her crying when she thought I was asleep. I thought about his new family and how they were probably discovering what we'd known all along, that David Mitchell was very good at making promises and very bad at keeping them. I saved the voicemail. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed the evidence of his desperation when I inevitably started to soften. I needed to remember that people who are dying often say things they don't mean, make promises they can't keep, and express love they've never bothered to show. But as I drove home that night, his words echoed in my head, if there's any small piece of love left for the man I used to be. The terrifying truth was that there was. Despite everything, despite 20 years of anger and abandonment and unanswered questions, some small part of my 8-year-old heart still remembered being Daddy's little girl. And that part was exactly what made this decision so impossible. I called Mom from my car in the hospital parking lot, unable to face going home with this burden alone. The phone rang 4 times before her familiar voice answered, slightly breathless from her evening shift at the medical supply company where she'd worked for the past 8 years. Sarah? Is everything okay? You never call this late. Mom, I need to tell you something. My voice cracked on the words. It's about Dad. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Is he dead? No, Mom. But he's dying. He needs a kidney transplant, and apparently I'm his only match. The sound that came through the phone wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a gasp, it was the noise someone makes when 20 years of carefully constructed emotional walls suddenly crumble. I heard her sink into a chair, heard the familiar creak of the kitchen stool she always sat on when she was upset. Oh God, she whispered. Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. Mom, there's more. The hospital gave me his medical history. He's been sick for years, and I took a breath. He has another family. A wife and 2 kids. This time the silence was different, sharper, more brittle. When Mom spoke again, her voice had an edge I rarely heard. Another family. She repeated the words like she was testing how they tasted. Of course he does. Of course he built a new life while we. She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. While we struggled. While we barely survived. While we learned to be a family of 2 because he couldn't be bothered. To be part of a family of 3. I need to show you something, Mom said suddenly. Can you come over? Tonight? 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Mom's small living room, watching her rummage through her bedroom dresser with shaking hands. She emerged with a manila folder I'd never seen before, worn soft at the edges from years of handling. I should have thrown these away years ago, she said, settling beside me on the couch. But I couldn't. I kept thinking. I kept hoping. She opened the folder and my breath caught. Divorce papers. Typed, official, complete except for signatures. Dated December 1997, almost a year after he left. I filled them out 3 times, Mom said, her finger tracing the edges of the papers. 3 times I drove to the courthouse. 3 times I sat in the parking lot and couldn't make myself walk. Inside. Mom, why? But even as I asked, I thought I knew. Because filing them would make it real. It would mean giving up hope that he might come back, might explain, might. She shrugged helplessly. Might be the man I thought I married. I stared at the papers, at the blank signature lines that represented 20 years of limbo. You're still married to him. Legally, yes. Emotionally, I buried him years ago. Or tried to. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The pathetic truth is, some part of me never stopped loving who he was before he left. Not who he became, but who he was. He stole from us, Mom. The joint account was empty when he left. I saw the bank statements when I applied for college financial aid. Mom nodded, fresh tears spilling over. 12,000 dollars. Everything we had saved for your college fund, for emergencies, for our future. Gone in one withdrawal the day before Christmas. The betrayal hit me anew. Not just abandonment, but theft. Not just leaving, but ensuring we couldn't follow, couldn't recover, couldn't do anything but survive. I worked myself to the bone to put you through school, Mom continued. 3 jobs some semesters, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so you could have real meals. And I never regretted it, not once, because you were worth everything. But Sarah, knowing he's out there living his life while we scraped by. What do you think I should do? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her answer. Mom was quiet for a long time, staring at the divorce papers in her lap. I think, she said finally, that you have to decide who you want to be in this situation. Not who he deserves, but who you are. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. She looked at me with eyes that held 20 years of pain and strength in equal measure. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you save his life, I'll be proud of your compassion. If you don't, I'll understand your reasons. But don't make this choice based on him. Make it based on the incredible woman you've become despite him. I left Mom's house that night with more questions than answers, carrying the weight of her unfiled divorce papers and 20 years of hope that had never quite died. The hospital visitor badge felt unnaturally heavy in my hand as I stood outside room 314, my medical ID clipped to my white coat providing a strange sense of armor. I delivered devastating diagnoses to families, performed emergency surgeries on children, held parents while their worlds collapsed, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. I knocked softly and heard a weak, "Come in," from inside. When I pushed open the door, 20 years collapsed into nothing. He looked smaller than I remembered, which shouldn't have surprised me since I'd been 8 when I last saw him. The man who had once seemed impossibly tall and strong was now a pale, thin figure dwarfed by the hospital bed. His hair, what was left of it, was completely gray. His skin had the waxy, yellowish tint that comes with kidney failure. But his eyes were exactly the same warm brown I remembered. "Sarah," he whispered, and the word came out like a prayer. I stayed by the door, my hand still on the handle, ready to flee if this became too much. "Hello, Dad." The formal distance in my voice made him flinch, but he recovered quickly. You look so much like your mother when she was your age. Beautiful. Successful. Everything I always knew you'd become. Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't pretend you knew anything about who I'd become. You weren't here to know." He nodded, accepting the blow. "You're right. I have no idea who you are now. But I remember who you were, this brilliant little girl who wanted to be a veterinarian one week and an astronaut the next. You always wanted to help people, even then. I became a pediatric surgeon. I don't know why I told him. Maybe I wanted him to know what he'd missed, what his absence had cost him." His face lit up with genuine pride. "A surgeon? Sarah, that's incredible. I always knew you were smart, but you don't get to be proud of me." The words came out cold, clinical. "You don't get to take credit for anything I accomplished. I became a doctor despite you, not because of you." Before he could respond, the door opened behind me and a woman walked in carrying coffee and looking exhausted. She was pretty in a tired, worn-down way, with blonde hair that needed touching up and clothes that had been slept in. This had to be Linda, his wife. She stopped short when she saw me, her eyes darting between me and my father with obvious confusion. "Linda, this is Sarah," Dad said softly. "My daughter." The coffee cup slipped from Linda's hand, splashing across the linoleum floor. "Your daughter? Dave, you told me you didn't have any other children." The silence in the room was deafening. I watched Linda's face cycle through confusion, hurt, and finally understanding as she looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the family resemblance she couldn't deny. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For 15 years, you lied to me about having a daughter." "Linda, I can explain, can you? Can you explain why my children have a half-sister they've never met? Why you've been lying about your past our entire marriage?" I felt like an intruder in their crisis, but also vindicated in a twisted way. He'd done it to them too, the lies, the omissions, the selective truth-telling that made relationships impossible. Mrs. Mitchell, I said, my voice taking on the professional tone I used with distraught families. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I'm here to discuss the kidney transplant. Linda looked at me with new understanding. You're the match. You're his only hope. Apparently so. She sank into the visitor's chair, looking overwhelmed. This is a lot to process. I had no idea you existed until 3 days ago when the doctor said there was a potential donor. Join the club, I said dryly. I had no idea you existed until yesterday when I looked him up online. Dad was watching this exchange with growing distress. Sarah, please don't take this out on Linda and the kids. They didn't know. Take what out on them? The fact that you're a liar? The fact that you abandon families like other people change jobs? They'll figure that out on their own soon enough. The heart monitor started beeping faster as his stress levels spiked. Despite everything, my medical training kicked in. You need to calm down, I told him, checking his 4-line automatically. Your blood pressure can't handle this kind of stress. Are you going to help him? Linda asked suddenly. Are you going to donate the kidney? I looked between them, this man who had given me life and then disappeared from it, and this woman who was just beginning to understand what she'd married. The hospital visitor badge crinkled in my palm as I finally clipped it to my coat. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I need to understand a lot more before I make that decision. What do you need to understand? Dad asked desperately. I met his eyes directly for the first time since entering the room. I need to understand why you think you deserve to live when you've spent the last 20 years acting like the rest of us were already dead. Linda insisted I meet the kids before making any decisions, which felt both presumptuous and oddly touching. We arranged to meet at the hospital cafeteria the next afternoon, neutral ground where teenage awkwardness could hide behind vending machine snacks and uncomfortable plastic chairs. Emma arrived first, a 16-year-old who looked exactly like I had at that age, all knees and elbows and fierce intelligence hiding behind defensive posture. Jake followed, 13 and suspicious, wearing a baseball uniform that had seen better days. Linda looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Kids, this is Sarah, Linda said carefully. Your father's daughter from his first marriage. Emma's eyes widened. You're the one who might save Dad's life. The weight of expectation in her voice made my chest tight. I'm considering it. Why wouldn't you? Jake asked with the blunt honesty of a 13-year-old. He's your dad too. I looked at this boy who had my father's chin and my own stubborn expression, and felt something crack inside my chest. It's complicated. Adults always say that when they mean something is unfair, Emma said, crossing her arms. She was definitely my father's daughter. I could see his defiance in the set of her jaw. Linda shot her a warning look. Emma, we talked about this. No, it's okay, I said. I pulled out my phone and showed them the family photo I'd found on Facebook, their dad with them at what looked like a Christmas morning, everyone smiling and happy. This picture was taken 3 years ago. Do you see what's different between then and now? They studied the image, then looked around the sterile hospital cafeteria where we were having this surreal family meeting. Dad looks healthier, Jake said quietly. He does. But that's not what I meant. I zoomed in on the background of the photo. Look at the house. Look at the presents under the tree. Look at your clothes. Understanding dawned on Emma's face first. We had money then. Right. Your dad was employed, you lived in a bigger house, your family was financially stable. I put my phone away. Now tell me what happened between then and now. Linda's face flushed. Sarah, the children don't need to. Yes, they do, I said gently but firmly. Because this pattern has happened before, and they deserve to understand what they're dealing with. Dad lost his job, Jake said quietly. He said his boss was unfair, that they didn't appreciate him. And before that? Emma was starting to catch on. He lost the job before that too. And the one before that. How many jobs has your father lost in the past 5 years? Linda's silence was answer enough. Emma's face was pale now, the pieces clicking together in a way that was clearly painful but necessary. He doesn't keep jobs, Emma said slowly. He always has an excuse, but he doesn't keep them. I reached across the table and touched her hand gently. I want you to know that none of this is your fault. And it's not your responsibility to fix it. But you could fix it, Jake said desperately. You could save him. I could save his life, I corrected. But I can't save him from himself. And neither can you. That's when Linda pulled out the family photo from her purse, the one I'd seen in Dad's hospital room. It showed all 4 of them at what looked like a fair or carnival, everyone laughing, Dad holding cotton candy and looking genuinely happy. This was taken last year, Linda said quietly. Right before he got sick. Right before we found out about the medical bills he'd been hiding, the credit cards he'd maxed out, the promises he'd made that he couldn't keep. I studied the photo, seeing my father through their eyes, not the man who had abandoned me, but the man who was slowly disappointing them in smaller, more subtle ways. He loves us, Emma said fiercely. Whatever else is true, he loves us. I believe that, I said honestly. But loving someone and being good for them aren't the same thing. Is that why you left? Jake asked suddenly. Is that why you never visited or called? The question hit like a physical blow. Jake, I didn't leave. I was 8 years old when your father left us. I've been waiting 20 years for him to call. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Emma looked at the family photo again, but this time I could see her imagining it differently, imagining herself at 8 years old, waiting for a father who never came back. Oh God, Linda whispered. Oh God, what has he done to all of us? The next morning, I found myself in Dr. Elizabeth Chen's office, clutching my copy of the medical ethics guidelines like a lifeline. Dr. Chen had been my mentor through residency, a brilliant surgeon with an unwavering moral compass who'd guided me through every major decision of my medical career. If anyone could help me navigate this ethical minefield, it was her. Sarah, she said, closing the door behind me and gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I heard about your situation through the hospital grapevine. How are you holding up? I placed the ethics manual on her desk, my finger marking the page I'd been obsessing over since 3 a.m. I need help understanding my obligations here. As a doctor, as a daughter, as a human being. Dr. Chen picked up the manual and read the highlighted section aloud. Healthcare professionals must act in the best interests of their patients, avoiding conflicts of interest that may compromise professional judgment. She looked up at me. You're wondering if donating to your father creates a conflict of interest. I'm wondering if not donating violates my oath to do no harm. I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of sleepless nights. I have the power to save a life. Doesn't that create an obligation? Let's think through this systematically, Dr. Chen said, pulling out a legal pad. First, the medical facts. You're a compatible donor for a patient with end-stage renal disease. From a purely clinical standpoint, what would you recommend? Living donor transplantation from a related donor has excellent outcomes. Low surgical risk for the donor, high success rate for the recipient. The clinical language felt safer than the emotional reality. And your personal relationship to the patient? Estranged biological father who abandoned me 20 years ago. I kept my voice steady, professional. Dr. Chen made notes as I spoke. Have you consulted with the transplant psychiatrist yet? I have an appointment this afternoon. But I wanted to understand the ethical framework first. I leaned forward. Elizabeth, the Hippocratic Oath says, first, do no harm. But which choice causes more harm, letting him die when I could save him, or risking my own health for someone who's never been there for mine? That's the central question, isn't it? Dr. Chen set down her pen. Sarah, can I speak to you not as your supervisor, but as someone who's watched you struggle with abandonment issues throughout your training? I nodded, bracing myself. You've always been harder on yourself than necessary. You work longer hours, take on more difficult cases, push yourself beyond reasonable limits. I've always suspected it was because you felt you had to prove you were worthy of staying, worthy of commitment. The observation hit too close to home. What does that have to do with this decision? Everything. Because you're not asking whether you should donate to a patient who needs a kidney. You're asking whether you're obligated to prove your worth to a father who never valued you. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. Those are two completely different ethical questions. She pulled out another document from her files, a case study I recognized from our ethics rotations. Remember Mrs. Patterson? The alcoholic mother who needed a liver transplant from her daughter. The daughter refused. The ethics board supported her decision. I saw where this was going. Right. Because the board determined that the psychological harm to the donor outweighed the potential benefit to the recipient. The daughter had suffered years of abuse and neglect. Forcing her to sacrifice her body for her mother would have constituted further abuse. But my father isn't asking me to donate. He doesn't even know I'm considering it. Isn't he? Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. That voicemail you told me about, the hospital visits, his family's expectation, that's not manipulation? I thought. About Linda's desperate eyes, Emma's fierce protectiveness, Jake's confusion. About my father's weak voice calling me baby girl for the first time in 20 years. The ethics guidelines are clear on one point, Dr. Chen continued. Living donation must be truly voluntary, free from coercion, guilt, or undue pressure. Can you honestly say that's the case here? I stared at the highlighted text in the manual. Donors must be free to refuse donation without negative consequences to their relationships or well-being. But there will be negative consequences, I said quietly. If he dies and I could have prevented it, how do I live with that? And if you donate and he continues his pattern of using and abandoning people, how do you live with enabling that? Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. Sarah, you're a brilliant surgeon because you can separate emotion from clinical judgment. Apply that same skill here. It's not that simple. It is, actually. Remove the biological relationship. If a stranger who had a history of manipulating and abandoning their families needed a kidney, and you were a match, would you feel obligated to donate? The answer was immediate and clear. No. Then why should biology change the ethical calculation? Why should sharing DNA with someone who's caused you harm create an obligation that wouldn't exist otherwise? I sat in silence, absorbing the weight of her words. The medical ethics guidelines felt different now, not like a burden, but like permission to prioritize my own well-being. What if I'm wrong? I asked finally. What if he's genuinely changed, genuinely sorry? Then he'll prove it through his actions after he recovers, not before, Dr. Chen said firmly. Sarah, your worth isn't determined by your willingness to sacrifice yourself for people who've hurt you. That's not ethics, that's trauma response. I left her office with a clearer understanding of my professional obligations, but the personal ones still felt impossibly tangled. The ethics manual, tucked under my arm, felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge that medicine could guide my head, but couldn't heal my heart. I found Mom at her kitchen table that evening, surrounded by old bank statements and financial documents she'd clearly been avoiding for years. When I walked in without knocking, a privilege of being the only child of a single mother, she looked up with red-rimmed eyes. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, she began without preamble. About him having another family, about the medical bills. And I realized there are things I never told you, things I should have told you years ago. She gestured to the papers spread across the table like evidence in a cold case. I pulled these out after you left last night. I thought you should see exactly what he did to us. I sat down across from her, recognizing some of the documents, the bank statements I'd seen when applying for financial aid, the collection notices that had arrived sporadically throughout my childhood. But there were others I'd never seen before. This one, Mom said, sliding a bank statement across the table with a trembling hand. This is from December 23, 1996. The day before he left. The statement showed their joint checking account. Opening balance, $12,847.63. A single withdrawal on December 23, $12,847.63. Closing balance, $0. Every penny, Mom said quietly. Christmas money, your college fund, our emergency savings, the money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a real house. Gone. I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. You never told me he took everything. You were 8 years old. What was I supposed to say? That your father was a thief as well as a coward? She laughed bitterly. I kept hoping he'd send some of it back, that there was some explanation that would make sense. She pulled out another document, a credit report from 1997. He also maxed out every credit card we had before he left. $17,000 in debt that I didn't know existed until the bills started arriving. The picture she was painting grew uglier with each revelation. This hadn't been a man running from his responsibilities, this had been a man stealing from his family before abandoning them. How did we survive? I asked, though I was starting to understand the full scope of Mom's sacrifice. I filed for bankruptcy in 1998. Lost the apartment, lost the car, lost any chance of good credit for years. She rifled through more papers. I worked 3 jobs for the next decade. Breakfast shift at the diner, afternoon cleaning houses, evening shifts doing data entry from home after you went to bed. I remembered those years, Mom always tired, always stressed, always apologizing for things that weren't her fault. I'd thought we were poor because Dad had left. I hadn't realized we were poor because he'd robbed us blind first. The worst part, Mom continued, pulling out a folder I'd never seen before, was the calls. What calls? She opened the folder to reveal printed emails and phone records dating back years. He's contacted me 16 times since he left. Emails, mostly. A few phone calls. Always when he needed something. I scanned the emails with growing rage. Requests for money. Excuses about being between jobs. Promises to pay us back when things turned around. The most recent was from 18 months ago. Linda doesn't know about my past financial mistakes. Can you help me out just this once? You gave him money? I asked, incredulous. $5,000 over the years. Money I couldn't afford, money that should have gone to your education or our rent or groceries. Mom's voice was flat, defeated. I kept thinking maybe if I helped him, he'd want to see you. Maybe if I proved I wasn't bitter, he'd remember he had a daughter. Mom, I didn't know what to say. The betrayal was so complete, so ongoing, that it took my breath away. He used me, Sarah. For 20 years, he used my love against me. Every time I started to heal, every time I started to move on, he'd contact me with some crisis, some emergency, some promise that things would be different. She pulled out the final document, a bank statement from 6 months ago showing a transfer to David Mitchell for $800. This was the last time. He said Emma needed money for a school trip. Said he was embarrassed to ask Linda, that it would just be temporary. Mom's laugh was hollow. I found out from his Facebook page that they went to Disney World that month. My $800 helped pay for his other daughter's vacation while I ate ramen noodles for dinner. I stared at the evidence of systematic manipulation and financial abuse spanning 2 decades. My father hadn't just abandoned us, he'd been slowly bleeding us dry ever since. Why are you showing me this now? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Because if you save his life, you need to understand who you're saving. Mom met my eyes directly. He's not the man who left us broken-hearted. He's the man who's been breaking our hearts over and over again for 20 years. And if you give him this kidney, if you show him that kind of mercy, he'll see it as permission to take from you just like he took from me. The bank statements felt heavy in my hands, weighted with the truth I'd never wanted to face. My father wasn't just absent. He was actively harmful. And Mom had been protecting me from that knowledge my entire adult life. I found Mom at her kitchen table that evening, surrounded by old bank statements and financial documents she'd clearly been avoiding for years. When I walked in without knocking, a privilege of being the only child of a single mother, she looked up with red-rimmed eyes. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, she began without preamble. About him having another family, about the medical bills. And I realized there are things I never told you, things I should have told you years ago. She gestured to the papers spread across the table like evidence in a cold case. I pulled these out after you left last night. I thought you should see exactly what he did to us. I sat down across from her, recognizing some of the documents, the bank statements I'd seen when applying for financial aid, the collection notices that had arrived sporadically throughout my childhood. But there were others I'd never seen before. This one, Mom said, sliding a bank statement across the table with a trembling hand. This is from December 23, 1996. The day before he left. The statement showed their joint checking account. Opening balance, $12,847.63. A single withdrawal on December 23, $12,847.63. Closing balance, $0. Every penny, Mom said quietly. Christmas money, your college fund, our emergency savings, the money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a real house. Gone. I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. You never told me he took everything. You were 8 years old. What was I supposed to say? That your father was a thief as well as a coward? She laughed bitterly. I kept hoping he'd send some of it back, that there was some explanation that would make sense. She pulled out another document, a credit report from 1997. He also maxed out every credit card we had before he left. $17,000 in debt that I didn't know existed until the bills started arriving. The picture she was painting grew uglier with each revelation. This hadn't been a man running from his responsibilities, this had been a man stealing from his family before abandoning them. How did we survive? I asked, though I was starting to understand the full scope of Mom's sacrifice. I filed for bankruptcy in 1998. Lost the apartment, lost the car, lost any chance of good credit for years. She rifled through more papers. I worked 3 jobs for the next decade. Breakfast shift at the diner, afternoon cleaning houses, evening shifts doing data entry from home after you went to bed. I remembered those years, Mom always tired, always stressed, always apologizing for things that weren't her fault. I'd thought we were poor because Dad had left. I hadn't realized we were poor because he'd robbed us blind first. The worst part, Mom continued, pulling out a folder I'd never seen before, was the calls. What calls? She opened the folder to reveal printed emails and phone records dating back years. He's contacted me 16 times since he left. Emails, mostly. A few phone calls. Always when he needed something. I scanned the emails with growing rage. Requests for money. Excuses about being between jobs. Promises to pay us back when things turned around. The most recent was from 18 months ago. Linda doesn't know about my past financial mistakes. Can you help me out just this once? You gave him money? I asked, incredulous. $5,000 over the years. Money I couldn't afford, money that should have gone to your education or our rent or groceries. Mom's voice was flat, defeated. I kept thinking maybe if I helped him, he'd want to see you. Maybe if I proved I wasn't bitter, he'd remember he had a daughter. Mom, I didn't know what to say. The betrayal was so complete, so ongoing, that it took my breath away. He used me, Sarah. For 20 years, he used my love against me. Every time I started to heal, every time I started to move on, he'd contact me with some crisis, some emergency, some promise that things would be different. She pulled out the final document, a bank statement from 6 months ago showing a transfer to David Mitchell for $800. This was the last time. He said Emma needed money for a school trip. Said he was embarrassed to ask Linda, that it would just be temporary. Mom's laugh was hollow. I found out from his Facebook page that they went to Disney World that month. My $800 helped pay for his other daughter's vacation while I ate ramen noodles for dinner. I stared at the evidence of systematic manipulation and financial abuse spanning 2 decades. My father hadn't just abandoned us, he'd been slowly bleeding us dry ever since. Why are you showing me this now? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Because if you save his life, you need to understand who you're saving. Mom met my eyes directly. He's not the man who left us broken-hearted. He's the man who's been breaking our hearts over and over again for 20 years. And if you give him this kidney, if you show him that kind of mercy, he'll see it as permission to take from you just like he took from me. The bank statements felt heavy in my hands, weighted with the truth I'd never wanted to face. My father wasn't just absent. He was actively harmful. And Mom had been protecting me from that knowledge my entire adult life. The letter arrived at my apartment on a Thursday evening, delivered by Linda herself. She stood in my doorway looking haggard and desperate, clutching a white envelope with my name written in handwriting I recognized despite the 20-year gap. He wrote this for you, she said without preamble. His kidney function dropped again today. The doctors say he has maybe 2 weeks without dialysis, and his heart can't handle much more of that. I took the letter but didn't open it immediately. How are Emma and Jake handling this? Linda's composure cracked slightly. Emma's angry, at him, at me, at the whole situation. She keeps asking why he never told us about you, why he lied about his past. Jake he just wants his dad to live. He doesn't understand why anyone would hesitate to help. And you? I'm terrified, she admitted. Not just of losing him, but of what happens if he lives. Because you've shown me who he really is, and I don't know if I can stay married to someone who's lied to me for 15 years. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the letter with trembling hands. It was written on hospital stationery in the careful script of someone whose hands shake with illness. My dearest Sarah, I know I have no right to call you that anymore, no right to claim any relationship with you at all. But as I'm writing what might be my last words to you, I need you to know the truth about why I left. I was a coward. Not just for leaving, but for the reasons I left. Your mother deserved better than the truth, and so did you, but you deserve it now. I had a gambling problem. Not the casual betting kind, the destroy your family, lose your house, borrow from dangerous people kind. By Christmas of 1996, I owed $47,000 to people who don't negotiate payment plans. They'd already come to the house once when you and your mother were out. They made it clear that my family wasn't off limits, that I took the money from our account not to hurt you, but to pay them enough to buy time for you and your mother to be safe. I left because staying would have put you both in danger. The plan was to disappear, let them think I'd skipped town, and then come back when I'd figured out how to pay them off and start over. But once I was gone, I realized I was free from the debt, free from the shame, free from watching your mother's face when she looked at what I'd become. It was easier to stay gone than to face what I'd done. I know this sounds like excuses. Maybe it is. Maybe I convinced myself I was protecting you when really I was protecting myself from having to watch your lives fall apart because of my failures. The worst part is that I kept failing. I married Linda thinking I could be a better man, a better father, start fresh. But I never dealt with the gambling, never faced the addiction that destroyed our family. I just moved the problem to a new address. I've cost Linda and the kids their financial security the same way I cost you and your mother yours. I've lied to them the same way I lied to you. I've been a disappointment to them the same way I was a disappointment to you. I don't deserve your kidney. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve this letter being read instead of thrown away. But I need you to know that losing you was the biggest regret of my life, and knowing I caused you pain is worse than any illness could ever be. If you decide not to help me, I understand. If you decide you never want to see me again after this, I understand that too. But if there's any chance you can find it in your heart to save my life, I promise you this, I will spend whatever time I have left trying to become the man I should have been 20 years ago. I love you, baby girl. I've loved you every day since I left, and I'll love you whether you save me or let me go. Your father, David P.S. There's something else you should know. I never stopped hoping someday I'd be brave enough to come back and face you. That's why I never changed my name, never moved too far away. Part of me was always waiting for the courage to try to make things right. I just never expected it to Take dying to find it. I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Gambling addiction. Dangerous debts. The revelation recontextualized everything I thought I knew about his abandonment. He hadn't left because he didn't love us, he'd left because he did, but as I processed this new information, another emotion surfaced alongside the sympathy: rage. He'd made unilateral decisions about our lives based on his problems. He'd decided we were better off without him instead of trusting us with the truth. He'd robbed us of the choice to face the danger together, to find solutions as a family, to support him through recovery. Even his explanation was still fundamentally selfish. He'd protected himself from our disappointment by ensuring we'd never get the chance to help him heal. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Linda's number. Sarah? I'm sorry to call so late, but he's asking for you. His blood pressure's dropping, and the doctors, they think you should come if you want to say goodbye. The ultimatum I'd been dreading had arrived. In a few hours, I'd either be preparing for surgery to save his life, or watching him die knowing I'd chosen to let it happen. The letter lay on my kitchen table like evidence in a trial where I was both judge and jury. The truth it contained changed nothing about the pain he'd caused, but it complicated everything about the choice I had to make. Forgiveness wasn't the same as trust. Understanding wasn't the same as absolution. And saving someone's life didn't mean accepting them back into yours. But as I grabbed my keys and headed for the hospital, I realized that all the ethical frameworks and medical guidelines in the world couldn't answer the only question that really mattered: could I live with myself if I let him die, regardless of whether he deserved to live? I didn't go to the hospital that night. Instead, I sat in my living room until dawn, staring at my medical school diploma hanging on the wall, the piece of paper that represented everything I'd built from the ashes of his abandonment. Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, Doctor of Medicine, Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Magna cum laude. The gold seal caught the morning light, reminding me of the weight of achievement it represented. 4 years of undergraduate studies, working 2 jobs to pay for expenses Mom couldn't cover. 4 years of medical school, taking out loans that would take decades to repay. 3 years of residency, working 100-hour weeks for poverty wages. 2 years of fellowship specializing in pediatric surgery. 12 years of my life dedicated to becoming someone who saves children, someone who makes broken things whole, someone worthy of the trust desperate parents place in my hands every day. And all of it, every sleepless night studying, every missed social event, every relationship I'd sacrificed on the altar of achievement, had been motivated by the absence of the man now dying 3 miles away. I'd become a surgeon to prove I was valuable enough to keep. I'd specialized in pediatrics because some part of me was still that 8-year-old girl who needed saving. I'd built a career on fixing what was broken because I'd never been able to fix what was broken in my own family. The irony was devastating. My father's abandonment had shaped me into exactly the kind of person who could save his life, and now I had to decide whether to use those skills for him. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, past colleagues and professional connections, looking for someone to call at 6 a.m. who wouldn't judge me for falling apart. The list was shorter than I'd expected. I'd built a successful career but a sparse personal life, keeping people at arm's length the same way I'd learned to keep hope at bay. My finger hovered over Mom's number, but I knew she wouldn't sleep until this was over. She didn't need my 3 a.m. crisis calls on top of her own sleepless nights. Instead, I did what I always did when I couldn't sleep: I went to the hospital. The pediatric ICU was quieter than usual, just the soft beeping of monitors and the hushed voices of night shift nurses. I checked on my current patients out of habit, adjusting charts and reviewing treatment plans that didn't need reviewing. Dr. Patterson, the attending on duty, found me reorganizing a supply closet at 4 a.m. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check on the Morrison boy." "The Morrison boy is fine, and you know it." She studied my face with the concerned expression I'd seen her use with worried parents. "Want to talk about it?" So I told her everything. The kidney failure, the compatibility, the 20 years of abandonment, the gambling addiction, the impossible choice. She listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just letting me unload the weight I'd been carrying alone. "Can I ask you something?" she said when I'd finished. "What would you tell a parent who was struggling with this decision? If it was their estranged father who needed the transplant?" "I'd tell them that medical decisions should be made based on what's best for their health and well-being, not guilt or family obligation." "And if they felt guilty about that advice?" "I'd tell them that feeling guilty about prioritizing their own well-being is a sign of trauma, not selfishness." Dr. Patterson smiled sadly. "You give better advice than you follow. It's easier to be objective about other people's lives. Is it? Or is it easier to believe other people deserve better treatment than you give yourself?" I'd never thought of it that way, but she was right. I demanded impossible standards from myself while extending compassion freely to others. I expected myself to be stronger, more forgiving, more selfless than I would ever expect from my patients or their families. What if I make the wrong choice? I asked. There is no wrong choice here, Sarah. There's only the choice you can live with. She put a hand on my shoulder. But I'll tell you this, 12 years of watching you work has shown me that you have excellent judgment about what's best for people's health and recovery. Trust that judgment now. I left the hospital as the morning shift was arriving, my diploma waiting for me at home like a reminder of who I'd become despite everything. Or maybe because of everything. The sleepless night had clarified something important. I'd spent 20 years becoming strong enough to save lives. Now I had to decide if I was strong enough to choose whose life was worth saving, including my own. I found Mom in her garden that Saturday morning, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants she'd grown every year since I was small. It was her meditation, she always said, putting her hands in the dirt and making things grow despite whatever chaos was happening in the rest of her life. She looked up when she heard my car door slam, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Even at 51, she was beautiful in that understated way that comes from strength rather than vanity. But I could see the toll the past week had taken, new lines around her eyes, a tightness in her shoulders that spoke to sleepless nights. You look like hell, she said without preamble, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. When's the last time you slept? Same question to you. I sat down on the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. He wrote me a letter. Mom's hand stilled on the tomato plants. What did it say? I told her about the gambling addiction, the dangerous debts, his claim that leaving was meant to protect us. She listened in silence, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Do you believe him? I asked when I'd finished. Mom was quiet for a long time, methodically deadheading flowers that didn't need deadheading. Part of me does, she said finally. The gambling would explain a lot, the financial stress he tried to hide, the phone calls at odd hours, the way he'd disappear for days at a time. But it doesn't change what he did to us. She sat down beside me on the steps, pulling off her gardening gloves. Even if he left to protect us, he still left. He still took our money. He still chose to handle his problems alone instead of trusting us to help him. I noticed something glinting on her finger, her wedding ring, still there after 20 years. I'd seen it every day of my life, but somehow I'd stopped really seeing it. Mom, why are you still wearing that? She looked down at the simple gold band like she'd forgotten it was there. I don't know. Habit, I guess. You never dated anyone. Never even mentioned being interested in someone else. Sarah, we've talked about this. No, we haven't. Not really. I turned to face her fully. You're 51 years old. You're beautiful, intelligent, financially stable now. You could have had a dozen relationships over the years, maybe even remarried. But you never did. Why? Mom's face crumpled slightly, and I saw the truth she'd been hiding even from herself. Because I never stopped hoping he'd come back. The admission hung between us like a confession. After everything, the abandonment, the financial devastation, the 20 years of struggle, she'd still been waiting. Even after Linda? After finding out about his other family? Even then. She twisted the ring around her finger. I know how pathetic that sounds. I know how stupid it is. But some part of me never stopped loving the man I married, even though I knew he wasn't the man who left. That's not stupid, Mom. That's trauma bonding. She looked at me sharply. Don't psychoanalyze me, Sarah. I'm not psychoanalyzing you. I'm recognizing the pattern because I'm caught in the same one. I took her hand, feeling the ring that had become a chain. We've both been waiting for him to become the man we needed him to be, instead of accepting who he actually is. What are you saying? I'm saying that if I save his life, it needs to be because I choose to save it, not because I'm still trying to earn his love. And if you support that decision, it needs to be because you think it's right for me, not because you're hoping it will bring him back to us. Mom was quiet for a long time, staring at the ring that had marked 20 years of misplaced hope. What do you want to do? I want to help him. Not because he's my father, but because I'm a doctor and that's what doctors do. I want to save his life and then set boundaries that protect us from him ever hurting us again. And if he tries to rebuild a relationship with you after the surgery? Then he'll have to prove he's changed through his actions, not his words. And if he hasn't changed, if he tries to manipulate or use me the way he used you, I'll cut him out of my life permanently. Mom nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. You're not saving your father. You're saving a patient who happens to share your DNA. Exactly. She pulled off her wedding ring then, the first time I'd ever seen her hands bare. She held it up to the morning light, examining the gold band that had tethered her to the past. For 2 decades. I think I'm ready to stop waiting, she said quietly. What will you do with it? Mom smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "I think I'll plant it in the garden. Let something beautiful grow from it instead of letting it keep me stuck in place." She pressed the ring into my palm, and I felt the weight of her 20-year burden transferring to me momentarily before I handed it back. "Keep it," I said. "But not as a symbol of waiting. Keep it as a reminder that you're strong enough to love someone completely and still choose to protect yourself when they can't love you back the same way." As we sat there in the morning sun, I realized we'd both been prisoners of the same false hope, that somehow, if we were good enough, strong enough, forgiving enough, we could make him into the man we needed him to be. But that had never been our job. Our job was to decide who we wanted to be regardless of his choices. And I wanted to be someone who could save a life without sacrificing her own well-being in the process. The signed consent forms sat on my kitchen table like a contract with destiny. I'd filled them out 3 times over the past week, signing them, then tearing them up, then printing new copies and starting over. This time felt different. Final. The psychological evaluation had taken 4 hours. Dr. Martinez, the transplant psychiatrist, had probed every corner of my motivations with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many donors regret their decisions. "Why do you want to donate?" she'd asked for the 3rd time, approaching the question from a different angle. "Because I'm a doctor," I'd answered. "Because I have the ability to save a life, and that creates a responsibility. Even when that life belongs to someone who hurt you. Especially then. Because if I only save people who've been good to me, I'm not really practicing medicine, I'm practicing favoritism." That answer had seemed to satisfy her. She'd signed off on my psychological fitness, noting that my motivations appeared sound and that I demonstrated realistic expectations about the transplant's outcomes and limitations, but sitting here now, with the consent forms, I knew the real reason I was doing this had nothing to do with medical ethics or professional obligation. I was doing it because I needed to prove to myself that I was bigger than his abandonment, stronger than his failure, more capable of love than he'd ever been. I wasn't saving my father. I was saving myself from becoming someone who could let another person die out of spite. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "How much time do you need? The doctors want to schedule surgery as soon as possible." I stared at the forms again, at the dozens of risks and disclaimers I'd initialed. Surgical complications. Infection. Long-term kidney function impacts. The possibility that even after the transplant, he might not survive the recovery, but none of those scared me as much as the emotional risks I was accepting. The possibility that saving his life might make him think he could have a relationship with me. The chance that his gratitude might feel like manipulation. The risk that Emma and Jake might see me as their sister instead of a stranger who happened to share their father's DNA. I pulled out a piece of hospital stationery and began writing my own letter, not to him, but to myself. A record of my decision and the boundaries I was setting, something I could read later if I started to doubt my choices. To future Sarah, you chose to donate your kidney to David Mitchell on March 15, 2025. Here's why: not because he deserved it. He didn't, not because you forgave him. You haven't, not because you wanted a relationship with him. You did it because when faced with the choice between letting someone die and saving their life, you chose to save them. You did it because being abandoned by your father taught you the value of showing up for people, even when they haven't shown up for you. You did it because you're a doctor, and doctors save lives regardless of whether the patient deserves saving. Remember these conditions you set. 1. This donation does not entitle him to a relationship with you. 2. This donation does not erase 20 years of abandonment. 3. This donation does not make you responsible for his future choices or failures. 4. This donation does not make you obligated to help him again. You are giving him life. You are not giving him access to yours. If he tries to use this donation to manipulate you, remind him that giving someone a kidney doesn't make you family, it makes you a donor. If his other family expects you to become part of their lives, remind them that sharing DNA doesn't create obligation. You did this because you wanted to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that when you had the power to save a life, you used it. Not because the life belonged to someone you loved, but because life itself has value. You did this to prove that his failures didn't make you into someone who fails others. You did this to close the book on your childhood and start writing your adult story. Remember, you saved him. You don't owe him anything else. Love, Present Sarah P.S. If he disappoints you again, and he probably will, remember that his behavior is a reflection of his character, not the worth of your gift. I sealed the letter in an envelope and put it in my desk drawer. Then I picked up my pen and signed the consent forms with steady hands. The decision felt both monumental and anticlimactic. No dramatic music, no moment of spiritual clarity. Just a woman choosing to use her medical training to save a life, with full awareness of the emotional cost and clear boundaries around what that gift meant. I texted Linda back, "Surgery can be scheduled for Monday. Tell the surgical team they'll have their donor." Then I called Mom. "I'm doing it. I know, she said simply. I'm proud of you. Even though he doesn't deserve it. Especially because he doesn't deserve it. That's what makes you a better person than either of us ever was. As I hung up the phone, I realized something had shifted. For 20 years, I defined myself in relation to his absence, the daughter he left, the child he abandoned, the woman shaped by his failure. But signing those forms changed the equation. That I was no longer the daughter he left behind. I was the doctor who saved his life despite everything he'd done. And that identity belonged entirely to me. The hospital wristband felt surprisingly heavy as the nurse clicked it into place around my wrist. Sarah Mitchell, donor, printed in bold black letters, reducing 28 years of complicated family history to a single clinical designation. It was 5:30 a.m. on Monday morning, and the pre-surgical area buzzed with the controlled chaos I knew well from the other side. But being the patient instead of the doctor felt surreal, like watching a movie of someone else's life. Mom sat beside my bed, clutching a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She'd insisted on staying the night, despite my protests that I'd be fine alone. Now I was grateful for her presence as my hands shook with pre-surgical anxiety. How are you feeling? She asked for the dozenth time since we'd arrived. Like I'm about to voluntarily let someone cut me open to give a piece of myself to someone who doesn't deserve it, I said, then immediately regretted the words. Sorry. Pre-surgical nerves. Don't apologize for feeling conflicted. You're allowed to have complicated emotions about this. Dr. Reynolds, the surgical coordinator, appeared at my bedside with a clipboard. Final questions before we get started? How's he doing? Nervous, but stable. His kidney function declined overnight, so the timing is good. She paused. He asked if he could see you before surgery. I'd been dreading this request. What did you tell him? That it was up to you. There's no medical necessity for pre-surgical contact between donor and recipient. I looked at Mom, who squeezed my hand. It's your choice, sweetheart. Part of me wanted to see him, to look him in the eye one last time before I gave him the gift he'd never given me, presence when it mattered. But a larger part of me knew that seeing his fear and gratitude would only complicate emotions. I'd worked hard to clarify. No, I said finally. Tell him the donation speaks for itself. Dr. Reynolds nodded approvingly. I'll let the team know you're ready for pre-medication. As the nurse prepared my I thought about the letter I'd written to myself, safely locked in my desk drawer at home. The boundaries I'd set, the motivations I'd clarified, the identity I was claiming. This surgery wasn't about him, it was about who I wanted to be. The anesthesiologist introduced himself, explaining the procedure in terms I already knew by heart. General anesthesia, laparoscopic approach, estimated surgical time of 3 hours. I'd assisted on dozens of similar procedures, but experiencing it from the patient's perspective was entirely different. Any last words? Mom asked as they prepared to wheel me into surgery. Just, if something goes wrong, don't let him think this was about forgiveness. It wasn't. It was about medicine. Nothing will go wrong, she said firmly. But I'll remember. The surgical suite was exactly as I'd expected, bright, sterile, filled with the kind of controlled energy that comes with high-stakes medical procedures. Dr. Chen was there, having volunteered to assist despite this being outside her usual specialty. Her presence was comforting, a familiar face in an unfamiliar situation. Ready, Dr. Mitchell? The lead surgeon asked, his voice muffled by his surgical mask. Ready. The anesthesia mask came down, and the world began to fade. My last conscious thought was a strange sense of peace, not because I was helping my father, but because I was proving to myself that I could make hard decisions based on my values rather than my wounds. I woke up in recovery 4 hours later, groggy and disoriented but alive. The first thing I did was flex my fingers, then my toes, running through the mental checklist every surgeon knows by heart. Everything worked. Everything hurt, but in the manageable way that comes with successful surgery rather than complications. Mom was there, of course, looking relieved and exhausted. How do you feel? Like someone removed one of my organs, I said, then winced as laughing pulled at my incisions. How did it go? Perfectly, according to Dr. Chen. The kidney was healthy, the transplant went smoothly, and both surgeries finished on schedule. And him? Alive. The kidney started producing urine immediately, which the doctors say is a very good sign. Mom hesitated. He's been asking about you. I'm sure he has. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of completion. It's done. I did what I needed to do. The hospital wristband was still on my arm, now joined by additional bands for pain medication and post-surgical monitoring. Sarah Mitchell, donor, suddenly felt less like a burden and more like an achievement. I'd donated a kidney not out of guilt or hope or family obligation, but out of a clear-eyed decision to save a life because saving lives was who I was. The physical pain was manageable. The emotional clarity was profound. I'd given him life. But I'd given myself something more valuable, the knowledge that I could face my worst fear and act from strength rather than trauma. When the nurses came to check my vitals, I asked them to remove the original wristband and give me a new one. This one would just say, Sarah Mitchell, patient, because that's all I was now, someone recovering from surgery, not someone defined by her relationship to the man in the room down the hall. The gift had been given. The obligation was complete. Everything that happened next would be his choice, not mine. The no contact letter took me 3 days to write, composed during the long hours of post-surgical recovery when pain medication made my thoughts clearer than they'd been in weeks. I wrote it on hospital stationery, the same kind he'd used. For his letter to me, but mine would serve a very different purpose. David, the kidney transplant was successful. Your new kidney is functioning well, and your prognosis is excellent. You should expect to live a normal lifespan with proper medical care and compliance with your medications. Now that the medical emergency is over, I need to establish clear boundaries for our future relationship. I donated my kidney to you because I am a doctor and saving lives is what I do. This donation was not an act of forgiveness, reconciliation, or family bonding. It was a medical procedure performed by a qualified donor for a compatible recipient. I do not want a relationship with you. I do not want phone calls, letters, emails, or visits. I do not want updates on your recovery, reports on your family, or expressions of gratitude. I do not want to be included in your future medical decisions or family events. I am not your daughter in any meaningful sense of that word. I am the person who donated a kidney to you, nothing more. If you contact me directly, I will not respond. If you contact my mother, I will consider it harassment. If you attempt to involve Emma, Jake, or Linda in efforts to reach me, I will consider it manipulation. You are alive because of my medical training and professional ethics, not because of any biological relationship between us. Do not mistake this gift for permission to re-enter my life. I wish you well in your recovery and your future. Live the life I made possible for you, but live it without me. Dr. Sarah Michelli sealed the letter in a hospital envelope and asked Mom to deliver it. She read it first, at my request, then nodded approvingly. It's clear, she said. No room for misinterpretation. That's the point. He's good at finding loopholes in unclear communication. Linda came to see me on day 4, looking better than she had since this whole ordeal began. She knocked softly on my door, carrying flowers and wearing the expression of someone carrying a heavy burden. How are you feeling? She asked, settling into the visitor's chair. Sore, but healing well. How's he doing? Better every day. The difference is remarkable. His color's back, he's alert, optimistic. She paused. He's also asking about you constantly. I hope you got my letter. I did. Linda's voice was careful, measured. I have to ask, is there any chance you might reconsider? The kids are hoping, no. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Linda, I need you to understand something. I saved his life, but I can't save your marriage. I gave him a kidney, but I can't give him a character transplant. Her face fell slightly. What do you mean? He lied to you about me for 15 years. That pattern of deception isn't going to change because he has a healthy kidney. If anything, feeling better might make him feel entitled to go back to his old behaviors. You think he'll disappoint us again? I think he's shown you who he is. Through his actions, not his words. A near-death experience might motivate temporary changes, but lasting change requires work he's never been willing to do. Linda was quiet for a long time, processing this reality. What should I do? That's not my decision to make. But if I were you, I'd judge him by what he does moving forward, not what he promises. And I'd protect Emma and Jake from getting their hopes up about having a perfect father, because that's not who he is. They're already talking about wanting to know you better, about family holidays together. The thought made my chest tight. They seem like wonderful kids, Linda. But I'm not their sister, and we're not going to be a blended family. This kidney donation doesn't create obligations or relationships that didn't exist before. She nodded sadly. I understand. I hoped maybe something good could come from all this pain. Something good did come from it. He's alive. That's enough. After Linda left, Dr. Chen stopped by to check on my recovery. She found me staring out the window at the parking lot, watching families come and go from the hospital. How are you processing all this? She asked, settling into the chair Linda had vacated. Better than I expected. I feel clean, I guess. Like I finally paid a debt I never actually owed. Any regrets? About the surgery? No. About the letter? I gestured to the copy I'd kept for my records. We'll see. But I needed to be clear about my boundaries before he started assuming this changed our relationship. That was wise. Recovery euphoria can make patients feel like they owe their donors everything, including access to their lives. I don't want his gratitude. I want his compliance with his medical regimen and his respect for my choices. Dr. Chen smiled. You know, I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, and I've never seen a donor handle the psychological aspects of transplantation with this much clarity. Most donors aren't trying to save someone who abandoned them. True. But most donors also don't have your level of self-awareness and professional training. She checked my incision sites, nodding approvingly. At the healing progress. You did something remarkable here, Sarah. Not just medically, but emotionally. You gave life without giving power. As she left, I picked up the copy of my letter again. The words looked stark on the hospital stationery, but they felt like freedom. I'd spent 20 years waiting for him to choose me. Now I was choosing myself. And that choice included protecting myself from his attempts to turn my gift into leverage for a relationship I didn't want. The kidney was his now. But my life remained mine, and I intended to keep it that way.